this morning, when I woke up, I was thinking about homelessness, and I was thinking to myself, what does homelessness mean? And what came to my mind was that homelessness means that a person is lacking resources to build a structure that can protect them from the elements. They're lacking the resources, lacking the space. They're for some reason prohibited from having these things, and therefore they're forced to face the elements, to be in the world and deal with homelessness. And when I ask, why is a person lacking these resources? Is it because the earth is lacking the resources necessary for the individual to be able to build a home? No, that's not why. The reason is because there is an artificial superstructure placed on top of the earth, which is creating the phenomena of homelessness.
So how I see it relates to that is that homelessness also has to do with an acquisition of space, and which definitely goes back to there's an artificial things that nations or authority or property in general has attributed to space. In other words, I own space. I can control its use. I can dominate its distribution. And so nations actually control the space. We're in an artificial world inside of a world. In other words, we're trapped in the boundaries of the nation. And so we're limited in what we can do inside the nation because actually we're not free. We're only free to use space in relation to what the nation authority agrees can be used and in what way.
This goes back to me, to the central problem, which is basically the problem of private property. It's
right.
The ideology
yes.
of private property. When we probe that concept, the notion of owning something against the well-being of other people, it starts to seem rather strange, most specifically because it's not like the space was created by these individuals who own it. It was here, it was given. And it's the same case with the resources they use to build a house. Because what separates, once again, a homeless person from a non-homeless person? A home. A structure that they can dwell in, that can protect them from the elements. You brought up another point earlier. Keep them safe as well. And all around just generally help their well-being. So I think, it goes back to this issue of private property, the idea of it, the justification of it, and to me, this is simply an ideology without justification in a social context.
Right, and so I think private property goes to the issue also that you brought up about safety. I said. So I do agree. Safety. So even if I have all the resources to build something, if I can't make it safe, in a sense, I haven't what we call a house, because a house is more than just than a cave would do. It would really matter or a cardboard box, anything that kept us from the elements. But it's really more than that. It has to do with our ability to make it so that it's safe enough to not be, laden with some other person being able to steal it easy or to take things from it, or for us to actually keep it. Keeping it goes back to me to the issue of power and authority. So if someone says private property is mine, it takes some form of a power or authority to actually keep that. Because if you say...
you're talking about some type of physical force.
Right, some kind of coercion, some type of force. Private property...
That's what the ideology solidified by.
Correct.
Yeah, kept in place, enforced.
Right, there's no such thing as private property in a sense that I can hoard land unless I have force to do so.
Yeah, there's no such thing as private property in the universe,
right,
per se. This is this artificial superstructure that we are imposing on the universe.
Correct.
And it really just punishes. And I think you make a good point. It's keeping a certain class or group of people in power over other people. When I think back on the history of mankind, in a political sense, in a social sense, it actually seems really clear to me. The history of mankind is not a history of freedom. I mean, it's very obvious. It's actually a history of slavery, wherein there have been masters and slaves. And it seems that now it's gotten more subtle, though. That's the interesting thing. In the capitalism, this distinction gets more subtle. It seems harder to detect because of the rhetoric where the capitalists would say that these workers, slaves, are basically doing the labor of their own free choice, free will. They're not being coerced, but they are. Are they not?
Yeah, they're monetarily being coerced. And the other thing I hear some tables talking about that, well, they could always move. And I tell people, this actually is a complete lie. We're sold an arbitrary thing because when nations are in the business of controlling and dominating private property or property that even if they call it public, the point is I cannot choose to go to another country with my free will. In other words, I have to pay or they don't allow certain people in. Or movement is actually constricted by this arbitrary thing called nations.
Yeah, here we have, there's the private property of individuals, then there's a private property of nations. It's still this concept of private property.
Yes.
I want to say something more about this idea of this ideology, this rhetoric is what it really is, where these individuals say that these workers are not being coerced. They're free in their choice to work. Well, not so. What is being held against them as the alternative? The whip of hunger and the elements. In other words, I talked about homelessness as this sense of not having a superstructure to protect one from the elements. So the violence of this system, this capitalist system, is that the individual, the people in power say to the individual, you either conform to the system by submitting in a slave fashion, or we are going to force upon you endurance of the elements without the resources to defend yourself from these elements. That is a form of violence. We're going to monopolize those elements, and we're going to use them against you, basically.
Well, I think it's almost even more subversive than how you're saying it, because in a sense, the government owns the trees. They own the land. So even if there was land and I could actually utilize trees to build a house, if I just randomly went into a state park, started cutting down trees and building a log cabin and making myself safe, I would actually be attacked. I would actually, the home would be destroyed. I would be put in jail for committing a crime. Yeah. So they say we have a choice. Actually, we don't. You either, as you say, completely suffer and have no ability to utilize any resource because they actually own all resources.
Yeah, they do put a monopoly
right
on it, but it's interesting. That monopoly is directed. It's not monopolizing the land for the sake of itself. If a government was monopolizing land properly, it would be monopolizing in the fashion where it was trying to build a society, which means it would be trying to build a structure where everybody had protection from the elements. Now, this idea of owning this land or owning these trees, what's the direction that the government owns this in a capitalist system? It owns it in the direction of being able to sell it
Correct.
to people that have money,
yes.
people that are wealthy, and then those people get to dictate, like as monarchs,
yes.
what happens to that land.
Or in the feudal system as small little elements of the government, in a sense.
Yeah, and so it's as if this system is saying that we are going to have a system where the powerful get to choose, and by powerful we really only mean people with money, capital. Yeah. Because they're not
with heavy accumulation.
Yeah, they're the ones who get to decide what should happen to the earth. Isn't that pretty much the bottom line at the end of the day? So the conclusion of all this is when you analyze the idea of homelessness, the reality of homelessness, what you find that it's a power system, as you're talking about, where rich individuals are given a monopoly on power through a system of government, which should really be building a social structure. That government contradicts itself. It ends up selling off the earth to entrepreneurs, whatever, and those entrepreneurs start dictating what happens. The entrepreneurs want the system to remain this way. They want it to be this way. They want to say, I have a right to this land. But that is insanity if you're trying to build a social system, an actual society. It's a total contradiction of the term society.
Yeah, and so then what you end up doing, like I said, is they're able to coerce you into work. You don't have a choice. Like I said, you couldn't go out and start hunting because you need a hunting license.
Yeah.
So you have to pay for you couldn't start cutting down trees because you'd have to get a license for that. You can't build a home because even if you want to build a home yourself, because you have to have zoning rules and you have to have, build up to building codes. I mean, it's impossible for you just to do for yourself. So they say you're free to do what you want. Well, you're free to either follow everything they want or suffer. There is no other.
So how does the pyramid work? It seems that this pyramid works by rewarding individuals who are able to obtain the highest amount of capital and buy and purchase the system.
Absolutely.
That is pretty much a total disclosure and manifestation of the way this capitalist social matrix works. The people with power, it's not a democracy. It can't be a democracy at that point. The people with power buy the land, the property, and from that land, they are able to get more power and lord over people. And you're right, that idea of economic coercion, that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Economic coercion. Using poor conditions against individuals to force them, to coerce them to make choices they would not make if they had better economic conditions.
Especially in highly industrialized countries, we do this because we basically make it impossible for someone to live free range. I mean, you couldn't possibly just go somewhere and say, I'm going to live there. Every part of the land is owned. Every part of the land is dominated. Every part of the land is controlled.
Now, what I think is interesting is I don't have a problem with private property. This was a statement that was also said by Marx. He said, we do not mean to abolish private property. And that just shows you that a lot of people don't understand Marx as a philosopher, as a thinker. He says we do not mean to abolish private property. We mean to abolish the forms of private property where individuals are allowed to accumulate mass chunks of the earth, mass hordes of land, and then use that to exploit other people. It is okay for citizens to have property, to live on portions of the land. We're all here on the earth. You can't have a community if you have the land divided at the very foundation, the very basis. You start out with that axiom, an axiom where some people get more and some people get less, based on this arbitrary principle of wealth. Then obviously you're going to have major problems in the system. So who is to blame then for homelessness? Is it a lack of diligence in these people?
Well, no, the system, I see it how the system will always have some people that choose not to follow the rules of the system, and that's not a bad thing. We actually should see people that are doing it by choice is a good thing, because the system is a corruption of the way those things should be. So the fact of someone defying that system should not be seen as a bad thing.
I'll just try to take a simple premise that I think a lot of people would agree with. The more a person has, we'll just say in the term of knowledge, the more knowledge an individual has, the more responsible they become toward sharing that, toward educating other people. There's a responsibility there. Why would it be any different in an economic sense? If I monopolize a larger portion of the land, why is it that I have no obligation towards society at that point in time? I'm taking the only resource that mankind has, which is the earth, and then I'm using that as leverage, violently using that as leverage, and this is literal because that's what the...
Well, of course literal, yeah. There's no way to get outside of some form of coercion or threat. To have large portions of private property, you have to have threat.
Yeah, well, you got to keep that system in place. To leverage that against individuals, that is a form of violence. And why do I keep on rehashing this? Because capitalists who are ideologues for capitalism keep on claiming that capitalism is the only free system. It does not work by means of coercion. Of course it works by means of coercion. Why is it that I can't go use land that someone else has purchased this large... Why? That's a coercive system.
But right, that goes back to the thing of the fact that they think they purchased it. But they're always are going to go back far enough. Someone stole the land,
That's a much better distinction.
Or someone by force just came in and said, this is mine, drew a line, or thing. So no matter what, they think they bought it. Like somehow you said before, the land is not something that they produced. It's something they dominated. Yeah. It's something that they took by force or can keep by force, and then they give it out or sell it. But it actually, you can't really sell. It's like selling air in the sky. I mean,
that's a very important distinction you bring up, because I use the term they purchased the land, and then you say what you're pointing out is that that's a part of their rhetoric.
Correct.
Yes, that in reality,
rhetoric,
yes, that's part of their rhetoric. In reality, there is an act of
Well, it goes back to me for nations, because when they say they bought it, if they go back far enough, they bought it from the U.S., like you said. So the government, but the reason the U.S. government had got it is because of military power. So military power took force to begin with to actually own the land or keep the land.
Yeah, so it's stolen.
Yeah.
It's a stole. Now, I think I could see a capitalist at this point trying to reverse this idea by saying that, well, aren't you presupposing the idea of private property right there? Now, let me just answer this real quick.
You mean because of the issue of stealing?
Yes. When we use the term steal in this sense, we're using it in a collective sense, which means we're assuming that the land cannot be monopolized by any one person. So if you are going to have a context of private property, this would be the appropriate humanitarian, true society notion of private property. Whereas, obviously, their notion is very different. It's starting out with the assumption that one individual can own the land. So when we say steal, we mean steal from the individuals who are on this earth who have no other means to exist but by the earth itself.
Right, yeah. Well, I see like the statement before, property is theft. And then property is also freedom. So property is theft goes back to what you were saying there, that it already is a communal thing. So when they say we presuppose, well, we presuppose that we're all here and we all have equal individual rights to the land. So when someone comes in and say, no, I have extra rights, that's what private property of a large space of land would be. Coming in, if I came into a city and I said, well, this is mine.
Yeah.
Or I bought this. You're actually saying I have extra rights to land. So you've stolen from the well-being of the many. And then property is freedom when you realize that when you see it as no longer a individual but a communal use, then property is freedom.
That's a great point. In other words, what you're saying is that it's the absolute opposite of equality, what they're doing. It's the absolute opposite of equality. They're arguing that they get a special privilege, an extra privilege that other people don't deserve. And, of course, they argue this based on some type of social merit or something that they have. Whereas, in my view of the world, those benefits we have, what those dictate to us, because we have to exist in the context of society, is that we're more responsible to help society and help other people with those talents we have. Whereas they think that those talents they have a right to exploit other people with those talents. That's a very big difference in worldview there.
Yeah, that's definitely the difference. It's the understanding that you are part of the community, where they see themselves as outside of, and that's where they get their rhetoric for the love of capitalism and for the love of property, individual property, and ownership in general.
I would even go so far as to say that you can make a moral and an immoral distinction right there between the idea of what a person should do with their extra or whatever ability they have. Should they exploit society? And the interesting thing is that the extra that a person has, did that not generate within the context of society itself? That's another very important point, because people try to pretend like they're autonomous, that all of their abilities pop out of thin air, and therefore they have a right to take credit for them. That's not true. They're socially generated. They had favorable social conditions, which led to their productivity, their development, whatever. And so therefore, so far as I can see, if they're going to be consistent, they need to give back to society that allowed them to be that way in the first place. There is no such thing as an autonomous wilderness man. They don't exist. Where does he make all of his own clothes? Does he buy the rifle? He gets his food. Where does he get the seeds for? There's no such thing. It doesn't exist.
Well, and even if you go back to the thing, let's say he makes his own clothes. Did he make his own yarn? Did he make his own? Did he shear the sheep? Did he spin the wool? I mean, did he build the spinner that spin the wool? I mean,
it's a lack of reflection on a person's condition. It's a lack of awareness of what an individual's life presupposes. Right. And that's too bad. That needs to be dealt with in the context of society. We need to get to the point where people become aware of the fact that quality is generated in the context of society. And because it's generated in the context of society, society must therefore be protected. The very term society itself implies the act of social building, cooperation, community. And if you have an ideology which stands against the idea of building a community or a social group, then you have something that is not a society. You're trying to build something else from a society.
Right. When you mention society, I always think of the thing that we actually value production. This is an issue to me about capitalism. In other words, if you said, is this person worth helping? The issue is it's not equal how we usually help. In other words, if a person is rich, they get, even if they don't pay for it, just the fact that they are a rich person, they're perceived to deserve more help that's not equal. If a police is going to come and protect someone, you say, well, there's 10 people. Yeah. One is a vagrant and one is a millionaire. Even though the millionaire actually is not going to give $1 to the policeman will protect the millionaire and not the vagrant. Even though, in a sense, they're both humans, they're both not paying, or they're both, in society and deserve protection from the police that are supposed to be for the whole society and free of charge, in a sense. They're done by taxes. But they'll actually help the one over the other because we value the production that a person does.
Exactly. Yeah, to me, this goes back to a moral ideology, which you would say is an immoral ideology.
Right, yeah, immoral, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it goes back to an immoral ideology that we're superimposing once again, and it's an ideology of value.
Right.
And that ideology says, it is strictly an ideology of capitalism, because in capitalism, the man with the most capital is king. He is, in fact, considered a moral man or a moral woman. And that's a real problem. And that's what's leading to this idea that this person is valued above that person. Yeah. You're right. It goes back to this idea of productivity. Now, the interesting thing is, does a body of wealth demonstrate that an individual is productive? We both know the answer is no.
No.
Because but it can demonstrate that individual has monopolized a great deal of force in society, law in society, and then they've exploited many, many individuals to get to the status that they're ultimately at.
Right, and sometimes, like, say a child of someone who's rich, and then a child of someone who's poor. I mean, the child has yet to do anything, correct? But yet we still value, a certain child depending on their socioeconomic status that they're from. We certainly wouldn't do that if we were not being capitalist, because we're only valuing the worth by productivity to me, or accumulation of wealth. The fact that this is probably going to be a child that's going to be, laden with more wealth, we value that. We idealize that this is the good thing. This is the good person. Not just even that it produces good things, but this is a good person, like you said, moralized, even if they actually are not a good person.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is really weird, too, because some people, if you ask them, is this a good person? No, but they're still the one that they value. So they actually are valuing the bad person as long as they have wealth.
And that's put in place by immoral ideology that gets distributed into the heart of the culture, that people start functioning by, and it's held there by authoritarianism. People just fall in line with it. They want to be considered a good person. And yeah, exactly as you're saying. We consider a person to be a good person precisely at the point where they have accumulated a large body of wealth, because for some reason, well, in capitalism, that is a status of accomplishment. And we commit a non sequitur by saying that that person that has all that wealth is actually moral. The two are not connected at all. My argument is actually it's the opposite, that a human being that has large sums of wealth, that's an immoral person. It has to be, unless that person is using that capital to do away with a system that is ultimately creating divisiveness and anti-society. It's producing an anti-social system. And they would have to be using that accumulation to do away with that, because they want to do away with oppression. Here's a sad thing, too. The very fact that we have to have a conversation like this about homelessness, about the nature and status of things, our position in the universe is that we're floating out here in the middle of nowhere in a hostile universe that does not care about us at all. The only hope that we have is the societies that we build. That's all we have. And to think that we would inject such a divisive ideology at the very heart of our existence that produces an anti-society, and then try to say that we're functioning within the context of a society, no wonder we have a schizophrenic dichotomy. No wonder we have a hostile contrast. No wonder we can't make society work. We're not trying to build one in a capitalist system. We're trying to build an oligarchy, basically.
Yeah, well, America, to me, already has an oligarchy, but they actually want totalitarianism. They want the next step. They want ultimate total control.
Yeah, because we're still in the same paradigm as we've been since possibly the dawn of our species, which is slaves and masters. Yeah. They still exist. They just exist in more subtle forms. I think it must have been heartbreaking to see slaves here in America that had accepted their lot as slaves, thinking that this is where they belonged, this was their place in the universe, and to put their oppressors in a place where they emphasized their moral status or their status of power as though these were good human beings. That's disturbing. That's, I think, the same condition that we find ourselves in today.
Well, yeah, and that reminds me of, you say good human beings. It reminds me that we consider a rich person who is only mildly intolerant to the oppression of people to be a good person. That's a good rich person. That somehow, if they have any sense at all, they're seen as good, because we're already accepting. The reason they're seen as good for just doing barely anything, just because they're a little bit nice, we're accepting that if you're rich, you can be as offensive as you want and still be moral. So the issue to me is going back to the fact of the homelessness. So to me, I see it that it's our obligation, since we have the control of resources, the government does in the United States. We have control of the resources. We have control of most of the land. Not all land is private and cut up. We own a lot of land, and cities own a lot of land. And they allow it to go to waste, or they allow it to be parking lots. I mean, we utilize land for very, like the fact that the waste of land that happens just for parking is outrageous. And all these places that we could actually put, like, say if we have the parking, we could build right above all parking places, some place for people to live.
This is, once again, capitalism doesn't produce what people need, it produces what people want.
Yeah.
And when it produces what people want, it produces things that, like vast amounts of cars. When you have a rich person that has a great deal of wealth and they try to play to the status of a philanthropist, to me, this is a contradiction. And the reason it's a contradiction is because unless you're using that wealth to put things back to a truly equalized status, which would mean to attack the system of inequality in the first place, you cannot call yourself a philanthropist. Because what you're ultimately doing is you're holding a system captive because your wealth represents the suffering of many, many individuals. That's what that wealth represents. He that has more power, he that has more knowledge, he that has more wealth is more responsible. And the person that tries to shrug that has, in a sense, tried to remove themselves from the context of society. At the same time, they're trying to drain and feed and exploit society. It's the idea of a parasite that does not want to be detected.
Well, and that thing too is, to me, a lot of people forget the humanity that people, even if they're homeless or vagrants, they forget that these are actual people. I think that they've removed the value to the point that these people are not even considered to be in society.
Well, you said it's monetary. It's all just monetary. Your worth as a human being is based on your financial wealth. That's the way this capitalist system works. It's, once again, it's a arbitrary, superimposed structure that we place upon the earth that is basically there to oppress people. That's not even accurate. It's there to enshrine and empower a limited group of people. That's what it's there for.
Well, and it's almost like a caste system, really, because let's say I have a minimum wage job. Let's say that the government doesn't give me anything, but people will treat me different just knowing I only have a minimum wage job. Once I have above, say, double minimum wage, now I'm treated different. I'm given, doors are open that were not before, places. When I get to the higher thing where I make, triple, quadruple, the more you keep making, it's like a step process of respect. It's a step process for doors opening. It's you get unequal protection at that point.
This conversation pushed us down the direction to talk about the system of capitalism precisely because the problem is systemic.
Yeah.
So it forces us down this when we start questioning. We start out with this idea of what is homelessness? Why are people homeless? Well, it's interesting. That question of why forces us back to this arbitrary system that we superimpose. And so whenever you talk about homelessness, whenever anyone talks about homelessness, to truly do justice to the concept, to the idea, to the reality, we are forced to talk about this superstructure that we impose on the system. It's not created by individuals in the sense that homeless individuals are making themselves homeless. That's a major error. It's created by individuals in the sense that individuals on top of the pyramid are monopolizing large sums of resources, vast bodies of resources, and because of that, it is obviously creating homelessness at the bottom. And that's, I think, the most important thing to note about homelessness. It's not a responsibility of the people on the bottom. It's a responsibility of the people on top. And a truly conscious person that was on top of that system, truly moral person that was on top of that system, would ultimately try to negate the system that creates this in the first place. That is intelligence. That is humanitarianism. That is social morality.
Right, but people want to be able to buy their morality. They want to build capitalism. They want to be able to buy
because they're not moral.
Yeah, they're not moral. And what they usually will say is, I'm a moral person, but they don't have a moral understanding of economics. They actually have a predatory understanding of economics, but then they still think that somehow they can say they act moral. If you support a predatory system, how are you acting moral? And the same thing that to me goes back to if there was a natural disaster that happened, a physical natural disaster, most people don't go and sell water to them. You give away water free. Most people help out and don't expect to be paid for it in general. So, but how about the psychological, disaster that's happening? How many people, like you said, are oppressed in the system and become mentally ill because of it? I recently saw an article where they said that when they gave people that were homeless, they gave them money and they had mental health issues, they actually improved their mental health status. So money, or like you said, ability to resources, has a absolutely direct effect.
Because money's not really money. It's
Right.
representative of the resources. And when you go back to the bare root of what those resources are, it's the earth. It's the earth and the resources on it. Space. What do human beings have at the end of the day? We have the space of the earth, and we have the vegetation that grows on the earth. That's basically it. That's all we have. This capitalist system comes along and says, well, I think we want to control this. We want to dish this out, and we want to dish it out in such a way that a small group of people on top can dictate what to do with it. And as I've tried to argue, that is what is creating the problem of homelessness in the first place.
Right, and I see a systemic issue of multiple issues for me, because I think that we also have this thing that everyone's supposed to be strong. It's this power dynamic. You need to be strong. You need to be healthy. You can't be disabled. You can't have emotional issues. You can't have mental issues. You basically have to be this Superman, fit man, this deserving man to be in the system. So if you have any issues where you're disabled, you're looked down on, you're oppressed, any psychological issues, well, then you're looked down on, you're oppressed, you're not a full person, not a full man. And it's funny, too, that people somehow think like that all the homeless are lazy in choosing to be homeless. And they also think that somehow they're all these people that have somehow a moral or a mental failing. And they're not getting that. They've done studies that most of the people are either have a mental health issue or are on drugs. And let's look at both those issues. Is that really lazy? Since we already know that just money alone, resource ability, actually removes mental health issues. And that drugs, most people get into drugs because of a sorry, sad life, a trying to escape, and they become addicted. And the ones that become addicted are usually the poor.
Yeah.
At a higher rate, it's obvious it's connected to monetary and ability of resources, because the poor are at a higher level of addiction than, say, the rich. And when the rich get addicted, they seem to be able to manage a lot of their addictions. You don't have as many problems where they lose jobs, lose family.
It's nearly common sense because they have more resources.
Correct.
That's all we have on the earth. And what you're saying goes back to what we were talking about before. It's just this is an immoral ideology that is put into place. This demonization you're talking about, that is all based on an unjustifiable, immoral ideology that is passed off as though it were actually moral. And that's where all of it's stemming from. And when you have, this is at the end of the day, the conclusion, when you drive it, when you do the math, when you follow the logic through, you can actually see that capitalism is a moral system. And when I say moral, I'm referring to an immoral system. But it's a moral system.
It's moralistic.
Yeah, it's moralistic. It's an ideology that a few individuals that have power higher up try to propagate and push and basically infiltrate through society so that society will conform to the wishes, the ideology, and the system of what I would call, and many people have called, the ruling class.
Right. Well, even if, let's just say that their argument sometimes is, well, if I didn't take it, someone else would. But that's already admitting that the taking it is wrong, and so they're actually admitting that they're doing an immoral thing.
That's a great point. Yeah,
and they're also presupposing that actually society owns it, because if someone else can take it, it means it's not theirs.
Yeah. Yes.
So deep down, people know these things. They already. So it's actually an intentional denial. And then they try to teach the intentional denial by the fact that there's this thing that we need to respect called authority.
Homelessness is complicated in one sense that the appearance of it is not the reality of it because it's systemic. So it's complicated in that sense. But it's not complicated when you think in terms of the ontology of existence, which is man on the earth. When you think of it in those terms, and you think about what homelessness entails, it entails lacking the resources to provide a structure where one can protect themselves from the elements. That's very simplistic when you put it in those terms. And when you put it in those terms and we do the math and we go backwards, we find out that homelessness is society's problem in the sense that we keep on affirming and validating a system which creates homelessness in the first place.
True, we actually build the cage. Like I said, to me, it's actually multiple cages.
We enshrine these individuals.
Yes.
We allow individuals to accumulate vast hordes of resources, wealth, everything, and then through exploitation, and then present themselves as being moral in the context of society. How is that even possible? Total contradiction.
Well, it goes back to the same thing with government. They believe that a few individuals understand what is best for the whole. And it's no different. It's a monopoly of power that starts with authority.
Monopoly is one of the great problems in society.
Yes.
I think that's one of the conclusions we can draw from this. The existence of monopolies is perhaps the greatest problem in society because that very idea is totally contrary to the notion of society itself.
Correct.
Society's cooperation, its community, but a monopoly is the exact opposite of that. It's a privileged right to a few individuals which cut against that notion of society or community.
Right, by design. It's designed that
way. By calculation.
Yeah, calculation.
Because, as we've been talking about, the history of mankind upon the earth has basically been that of slaves and masters. And I think from that, we learn that it's important for us to try to be aware of the system that we are contained in, aware of what's really happening to us, aware of the superstructure that is imposed on us, so that we don't condemn ourselves in the process.
Right, and to me, we can't bring the whole system down, and we can't make everyone aware. Some people don't want to be aware. So that's why I believe it's important, though, to attack the system, tax the rich, obligate social programs, obligate free housing, free medical. We need to obligate them as much as possible because they're not going to allow the whole system to go. So you have to undermine the system's nature, which is actually anti-humanitarian.
That's the problem, see, because the ruling class don't want to give up their power, obviously. No. And that's what you're talking about now, is that because they don't want to give up their power, the individual citizens, the true community, they actually have to try to take strides and stances against this tyranny, because that's what it is. It's tyranny.
Yes.
Against this artificial monopolization, that's what it is, so that we can actually get back to a true social context, which is an equality, where people are sharing the resources, not monopolizing the resources. That's why the way of the future toward the direction of society is the raising of the consciousness of individuals within society, so that those who are in a position of the ruling class become so aware of the nature of the very context in which they exist that they begin to attack the very system that is generating these type of conditions in the first place.